Hi, I'm KHOU 11 meteorologist Pat Cavlin coming to you from Houston, Texas with your Sunday, August 27th, 2023 tropical update. And this is going to be an update that squarely focuses on what is right now Tropical Storm Idalia, which is now starting to strengthen and will likely become a hurricane as we get into the start of the upcoming week. First things first, we're going to start with the satellite presentation, and this is pretty remarkable. So as of the 7 p.m. Central Time update, winds were sustained at 45 miles per hour, still kind of stationary, only moving to the east-northeast at around 3 miles per hour. But I really want to focus on what this satellite looks like, because these numbers don't change unless we get a measurement from a buoy, unless we get a measurement from an aircraft, or unless we get a satellite measurement of what the winds potentially are. So we really have to diagnose just what the satellite itself looks like. And I got to tell you, this is probably the most impressive looking tropical storm I have ever seen in my life, at least at this point in its strength. With winds only sustained at 45 miles per hour, this thing has consolidated extremely fast. Only within a span of 2 to 4 hours, we have not only seen this thing become more organized, but it just looks so healthy on satellite. So why does it look so healthy? What are the things that we're looking for here? First and foremost is just the perfect circular symmetry of the storm. That is a sign that the storm has started to consolidate. So the lower level circulation is now starting to stack up with the mid-level circulation. When you have that perfect stack, it means that wind shear is not going to be able to play as much of a role because it's starting to insulate itself from the outside environment. Once that happens, this thing becomes an engine and starts to take off. And that's really what we've started to see here on the satellite presentation this evening. So what are all these colors that we're looking at? This is infrared satellite. So what this is showing us is the temperature of the cloud top. Since it's dark out now, we can't see a visible satellite image, so we have to switch over to infrared. And what this tells us is basically the height of the cloud tops, right? Think about how high it is the farther up you go in the atmosphere. So the higher you are, the colder it gets. That's what we're looking at here. The higher the cloud tops are, the colder they are. And the higher the cloud tops are, the more intense the thunderstorms. So the train of thought here is the colder the cloud tops, the higher they are, and the higher the cloud tops, the more intense the thunderstorms are. So when you see these really bright colors here, the white and even some shades of purple there, that indicates cloud top temperatures that are below 80 degrees Celsius. So 80 degrees below 0 Celsius, which is just remarkable for a storm of this magnitude, of just a tropical storm. That's typically what you would see in a hurricane. So we are starting to see those really intense cold cloud tops around the center of circulation, which is right in there. And as a result, I do think this thing is going to undergo some pretty rapid intensification as we go through probably the next 24 hours. Just in for a closer look, just so you can get a really good idea of what I'm talking about. I mean, you really just get the sense that we've got these really cold clouds here in the center wrapping around that circulation. And what you need for a healthy storm is for a bunch of really tall thunderstorms to wrap around that circulation, because what happens then is the air in the middle starts to sink, and ultimately as it becomes a hurricane, that sinking air clears out all of the clouds, and that's how your eye forms. So right now it's just a tropical storm. I would not be surprised to see this thing maybe jump to hurricane status if these trends continue as early as Monday. So a really healthy looking storm here. Let's talk about what the intensity forecast looks like as of the 7 p.m. update. Winds right now sustained at 45 miles per hour, and we're expecting this to maintain tropical storm strength all the way until Monday night and Tuesday. That's as of the 7 p.m. update. So as of 7 p.m., they're expecting this thing to become a hurricane by Tuesday morning and then jump to Category 2 status by Wednesday morning. And then once it makes landfall sometime Wednesday morning to the afternoon, of course, then the intensity starts to drop off. So this is the data that we're working with right now. I almost guarantee, though, that based on what we're seeing with the satellite presentation of the storm, this forecast is going to change. I think they're going to increase the intensity of this storm if these satellite trends continue. So if the storm is in fact organizing, if it is in fact undergoing some sort of intensification right now, I think you're going to see all these numbers skew up, because I think we could easily get to maybe a 65 mile per hour storm by tomorrow morning, when right now they've got it forecast for tomorrow evening. All right, so let's take a look at what the forecast looks like on a map, because there's been changes to this as well from yesterday. The big change I think that jumps out to pretty much anyone that's been following along with this is now the National Hurricane Center is expecting a Category 2 hurricane at landfall. Yesterday evening, they were expecting a Category 1. Now we're starting to think that this storm is going to be more intense when it makes landfall somewhere here along the west coast of Florida, from the Big Bend all the way down towards southwest Florida, as again a Category 2 hurricane. The timing on this is going to be overnight Tuesday into Wednesday morning. I would say probably sometime around sunrise Wednesday, as this forecast stands right now, is when we're expecting to see that landfall. So as a result, hurricane watches have been posted here from the Big Bend all the way down from Tampa Bay into Charlotte Harbor. So now we're starting to get into areas that were impacted by Hurricane Ian almost a year ago. And then beyond that, in the yellow, those are tropical storm watches south of Charlotte Harbor into Fort Myers, into Bonita Springs, and all the way down towards Naples and Marco Island. So the area that we're thinking right now that could see the most likely impacts from a hurricane force storm as of the 7 p.m. advisory is, again, the Big Bend down towards Tampa Bay. It's really important to remember, though, and we talked about this in other videos, what this forecast cone means. The forecast cone shows us the most probable location that the center of the storm will take 60 to 70% of the time, which means the other 30 to 40% of the time that storm could deviate outside of that cone in either direction, whether that's out to the west or if it's down to the east. There is a chance that the storm tracks outside of that cone. What this cone also doesn't tell us are the impacts, because the impacts extend well outside the cone. This just tells us where the center of the storm goes. And right now it looks like it's going to go somewhere, again, between Tampa Bay and the Big Bend coast. That's how it looks right now, but that could change. So we got to keep that in mind here as we're looking at this forecast. If you live anywhere on the west coast of Florida, from the Big Bend all the way down towards Fort Myers, you need to be getting your hurricane plan into action right now, making sure that you have everything put together, because things are going to move fast. Again, we're expecting landfall by Wednesday morning. So tomorrow morning you wake up and all of a sudden this storm is moving into the Gulf of Mexico, and that window of time to prepare and to get things on the road is going to close pretty quickly. So right now, as of the 7 p.m. advisory, expecting a Category 2 hurricane at landfall. Let's talk about what the environmental factors look like as this storm moves into the Gulf of Mexico. We've got very warm water temperatures around 90 degrees. The whole Gulf of Mexico is like a hot tub right now. So as we look up into the atmosphere, we do have wind shear as you get into the northern part of the Gulf, but that is about the time that the storm starts to make landfall. So up until that point, the storm has little, if any, wind shear to hinder it. And again, if this storm can really get its act together before it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, and if it can kind of insulate itself off from those outside environmental conditions, that little bit of wind shear is not going to be a big factor. And then as we go through the middle and the end part of the week, it gets caught up in the jet stream. That's what the darker blue color is here. Those stronger winds screaming out of the south, that's the jet stream that's going to pick the storm up and take it out towards the Atlantic. This is going to be a big rainmaker, though, as we get to the Carolinas, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But first, let's talk about what our future track, our high-resolution future track, is looking like this evening. As we get into Monday morning, just before sunrise, we're still expecting the center of this storm to be meandering through the Yucatan Channel. I do think it's going to be a little bit stronger maybe than the future track is showing, but I think the location is solid. I think it's still here in the northwestern Caribbean. Watch how fast it moves, though. Once it kicks into the southern Gulf, now we're looking at Monday evening, just after sunset, 9 p.m., passes just to the west, at least on this computer simulation, just to the west of Cuba. And once it clears Cuba, this thing gets organized in a hurry. So here we are now, Tuesday morning. This thing is, again, looking very symmetrical on radar. This is simulated radar from our computer model. It's, I would say, about 300 miles, the center of the storm, probably about 300 to 400 miles to the west of the lower Keys. But we already start to see the impacts here through the Keys with these rain bands that start to move onshore through the area. So those rain bands are going to start to pivot onto the peninsula as we get through the day on Tuesday. And that is, again, why that window of time to make your preparations to hurricane-proof your home, that's going to close pretty quickly, because those impacts start to extend pretty far out from where the actual storm, where the actual center of that storm is. So we continue to play this forward now. we're Tuesday evening. So Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, again, very symmetrical here as a presentation on the model. And it is parallel, again, at least this computer model simulation showing it parallel to Tampa Bay, but not that far away. Probably about 150 miles to the west, which means hurricane conditions are likely for the Tampa Bay area. Just a note here of historical significance. Tampa Bay has not taken a direct hit from a hurricane since 1950, at least since 1950, which means there's a lot of new construction in the Tampa Bay area that has not been hurricane tested. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot of folks that live in the Tampa Bay area. You may be watching this from Tampa Bay. You haven't been through a hurricane, through a direct hit from a hurricane, again, in about 70 years, 75 years. So this could be a potentially significant storm for Tampa. You had a close call last year with Ian, and it looks like it's going to be a close call again this year. So now is the time to get those hurricane preparations in order before this thing starts to move into the Gulf of Mexico. So again, let's take a look at our model plots. So we just showed you what a high resolution version of the radar could look like with this hurricane. Now let's go over to our global models, the ones that we always talk about, the American GFS model and the European model. I'm going to show you the two model plots here to compare the paths that those two models take this storm on. As we get into Tuesday, check this out. They're in pretty good agreement here. Notice how tightly packed the lines are together. So not much of a difference in terms of whether the storm is to the west or to the east. And also, notice they're in the same spot here by Tuesday afternoon, which means the timing is identical on the two models. So good agreement is good. When you have good agreement in models, that gives us high confidence when it comes to the actual forecast. Let's keep going and see what happens. Still expecting landfall with the GFS and the European models somewhere in the Big Bend coast. However, there have been trends in the last 24 hours a little bit down towards the east. We have to keep an eye on those trends because those trends are important in determining ultimately the forecast that this system takes. So now let's see what those actual model lines look like when we talk about pressure and when we talk about rainfall. So all the black lines here, that indicates pressure. The more there are, the tighter packed together they are, the more intense the storm. So here we are Monday afternoon, again, still making its way through the Yucatan Channel. That lines up with the high resolution future track that I just showed you before. As we get into Monday night and Tuesday, the storm starts to deepen very rapidly here. And again, right around the west coast of Florida. So I think the impacts could be significant, if not from rainfall, definitely from storm surge as the winds start to scream in from the south and west. That's going to take all the water from the Gulf and push it onshore. We've already got storm surge watches in effect for portions of the west coast of Florida. And then from there, where it goes is still up in the air. The American model, again, shows a very similar situation, just a couple, maybe about 150 miles more to the west, which would, of course, would be a better scenario for the west coast of Florida. Still talking about storm surge, though, and big surf. But it looks like the worst of the wind impacts with this solution would be displaced farther offshore. This would be more of an impact for the Big Bend. But also look at how many of these lines there are and how tightly packed they are together. That is a sign of an intense storm. So we've got a pretty intense storm in the global computer models, the American and the European. So there is pretty good confidence that this storm is going to gain quite a bit of strength once it enters the Gulf of Mexico. Finally, let's talk about rainfall. This is going to be a big rain producer, and for areas that need it as well. Down in southwest Florida, they are running a big rainfall deficit. They're in a drought. They could use the rain. We could see upwards of about 1 to 3 inches of rain as of right now on the path that it's taking. Bigger totals, though, for the Tampa Bay area, probably closer to 2 to 4 inches of rain. And then the big winner here up towards, again, the Big Bend. If this is where the storm makes landfall, we could see upwards of 4 to 8 inches of rain with locally higher amounts. But that's not where the impacts end. Check this out. We get a huge swath of rainfall here up into the Carolinas and the low country of Georgia, areas that are very prone to flooding. A huge swath of rainfall here of about 2 to 5 inches of rain in about a 24 to 48 hour time span. So in a short period of time, a ton of rain. Flooding going to be a huge issue here from the Outer Banks all the way down through the low country of Georgia as you get into North Florida. So bottom line, these are the areas that need to start preparing right now, the areas in red. So again, from Tallahassee down through Fort Myers, you need to start preparing for impacts right now. If you live south of Fort Myers, as you get into coastal Collier County, as you get down towards places like Bonita Springs, Marco Island, monitor the forecast, make preparations, but it doesn't seem as urgent right now as areas from Fort Myers and points north. But any wiggle of this forecast farther to the east will have a significant change in that. And if this storm does end up strengthening quite a bit tonight into Monday morning, I almost guarantee you're going to see a further eastward shift in that track. So again, all the areas right here in North Florida, these are the areas that are going to have to really start to prepare for impacts and pay attention as we get into the start of the week. So a very fast evolving situation here. We've got about 3 days till landfall. Now is the time to start making those preparations. If you live anywhere, again, from Southwest Florida into the Big Bend of Florida, we're going to keep bringing you updates though as we go through the next few days.